Hi everyone, I'm Lisa from Pink Hollybush Designs. Welcome to my sewing studio where we talk everything sewing and smocking. Today we are going to talk about purchasing a used pleater. Now, it is possible to purchase a new pleater. There are still two companies in the world that are making them. The first is the Reed company out of South Africa that made the original pleater. They are still in business and still manufacturing pleaters. You also can, the second company that are making pleaters is the Princess company out of England. So why would you want to purchase a used one? Well, one, just the price. Pleaters, unfortunately, have gotten to be very expensive. A new one will, depending on the model that you purchase, run between $300 and $400. The second reason, though, that you probably would like to purchase a used one, especially if you're here in the United States, they're pretty plentiful. And they're a great thing to purchase used because except for the needles, which can break on any pleater, there really isn't much to break on them. So the pleater, for the most part, at least the ones I'm going to recommend to you, are made out of brass. They're a simple machine. They were actually based on the mangle that was used in washing that would wring your clothes for you. That is what gave the inventor the idea of how to pleat the fabric, and so they are very simple design. So here they are. There's these brass bars. The fabric goes through this. There just really is not much here to break other than, as I said, the needles. Assuming you want to purchase a used pleater, what are some considerations? Okay, so the first thing, I've already referred to it, and that is what is the pleater made of. So when you find one, definitely contact the seller if you're purchasing online and ask, are there any plastic parts? Some of the pleaters that were manufactured in the past and are out there now did have plastic parts to them. And besides the fact that, of course, the plastic could break, I also just found in working with that type of pleater that it doesn't have the heft and the weight. And when you are trying to put fabric through, especially if you're working with a thicker or bulkier fabric, the weight of an all-metal pleater keeps it in place, it keeps it from shifting, and it just makes it much easier for you to work with the pleater and have that fabric go through smoother. Where the plastic one, it was kind of shifting around on me as I was trying to pleat, and that just didn't work very well. It was frustrating. Okay, the second consideration is, as I mentioned, is the pleater still being manufactured? Because of course you do need to be able to purchase replacement needles. And if it's not still being manufactured, are the needles still being manufactured? Because that's the most important thing that you need to have. So as I mentioned, if you find a used Reed pleater, Reed is still in business. They are still manufacturing. If you find a used Princess pleater, the same thing. Now, I have rarely seen the Princess pleater here in the United States, and my understanding from looking at their website is that they've only been in business for about 30 years. So I don't know how many of those are available here. Let's me backtrack. If you are looking for a new pleater, the three places you can purchase them in the United States is from the Tosca company and Creative Sewing and Smocking. Both of those companies carry the Reed, and All Brands carries both the Reed and the Princess. But All Brands is the only place I have seen the Princess carried. I will put links to all of those below, of course, if you want to go and take a look at that. Okay, back to considerations. So as I said, we're going to make sure that it's all metal. And then the second thing is it still being manufactured? Can I get those needles? So besides the Reed or the Princess, in the United States at least, the most popular pleaters that you will find are the Sally Stanley and the Amanda Jane. The Amanda Jane came out of Australia, but it was very popular here, and the Sally Stanley was also very popular here. Now, the Amanda Jane needles are still being manufactured, and the Sally Stanley takes the Amanda Jane needles. So I have one of both, the Amanda Jane and the Sally Stanley. I use the Amanda Jane needles all the time in both of the pleaters. Now, you will find there's something called generic needles, and those are advertised as working in the Sally Stanley. I have a whole blog post on that. I will link to that below as well. I have not had luck with the generic needles. They all broke very easily in my Sally Stanley, so I do not use those anymore, and I just use the Amanda Jane needles. Now, another consideration you should know is needles are not, for the most part, interchangeable. So Reed needles are different than Amanda Jane and Sally Stanley needles, and Reed needles for their 16 row are different than their 24 and 32 row pleaters. So just a little tidbit you need to know, but if you're buying a Reed pleater, you have to have Reed needles, and you have to have the right size Reed needles. All right, another consideration, what size pleater do you want? Pleaters come in 16, 24, and 32 rows. Now, I believe that only the Reed actually comes in the 32. But you will find 16 and 24 are out there a lot. Now, do not assume that the bigger the pleater, the better. A lot of times it's easier to work with that 16 row pleater. It's just easier to kind of manipulate and work around it as you're putting the fabric through. So I have a lot of friends who have both and prefer to work with that 16 row. As I mentioned, I have a 16 row little Amanda, and I have a 24 row Sally Stanley. I really don't find much difference between the two. In fact, the way I handle it is I keep my little Amanda with almost all the needles in, and I use that for inserts and ornaments. And then my Sally Stanley I keep with just a smaller number of needles in it, and I'm using that for skirts where I'm probably only pleating 6 to 9 rows rather than 11 rows with my other. So that's just how it works for me. When you're thinking about the number of rows that you need, you will find, I'm trying to think if I've ever pleated more than 16 rows. I don't think I have. That just isn't something that you're going to run into a lot. When would you want to pleat more than 16 rows? Well, if you were doing a dress that's smocked shoulder to waist. In that situation, you could get into needing more than 16 rows. And there is a technique, it is advanced technique, but there is a technique for putting the pleating through twice so that you can have more rows. But that might be a reason why you might want a pleater that has those 24 rows rather than the 16. Okay. The third consideration, I think we're on number 3 here, is do you want half spaces or whole spaces, or do you not have a preference? So this is my little Amanda, and it is all what are called half spaces. So the space between needles on a pleater is typically 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Half space would be half of that. So on my Sally Stanley, half of the pleater has half spaces and half of the pleater is full spaces. Now, why would that make a difference? Well, when you're pleating fabric and you're putting, let's say, a skirt through, and you're keeping that raw edge of the skirt lined up with one groove, and then you have your line on the fabric that you're keeping lined up with one of the pleating needles, and you're putting it through. I find it easier. You have to keep your eye on all of that. I find it easier to work with the full spaces because there's not as many grooves that I'm trying to keep my eye on. I find all these grooves, you can kind of lose track of where you are. But that's just my personal preference. You might like having all those half spaces, or you might not have a preference about it at all, but that's just something, again, to be aware of and think about. Okay, the last thing you really want to be aware of is the opening that the fabric goes through. Now, when you're going to come look at my little manta again, if you're pleating a skirt, the fabric's going to be rolled on a dowel, and the dowel's going through this opening right here. And as you can see on my little Amanda here, that opening is pretty big. I could get quite a lot of fabric rolled on a dowel and inserted through here. But the original reed, which there's a lot of those out there, so the reed 16 row pleater, that opening is, this opening here is very small. So again, that would be something, if you're looking at a reed, that you want to email the seller and ask, what is the size of this opening? Because on that original reed with the smaller opening, you're kind of limited at maybe like a size 4 skirt. If you're trying to pleat anything bigger than that, when you roll that fabric up, it will not fit through there. And so, you know, you want to be able to still smock a dress for a child who's 6 or 8. You're not going to be able to do it with that reed. How much should you expect to pay for a used pleater, at least in the United States? I'm sorry I can't give more direction for elsewhere. But in the United States, a used, right now, this is September 1st, 2022. I went onto eBay. Right now, I can get a 24 row Sally Stanley for $175. There's another one that's $199. Both of those are buy now, so that is the price that you could get it for. You might be able to do better, but if you were bidding, but you can get it for that. The Amanda Jane tends to be a little bit pricier. So the Amanda Jane, the one that I did find on eBay right now, is $275. So again, you know, keep an eye out. Look, where else would you find them besides eBay? Look on Facebook at some of the de-stash sites, and also estate sales. I mean, they are popping up. But so keep an eye out. Let your friends know, and I hope you can find a used pleater. Now, when you do, make sure you pop on over. I'll put a link to my how to clean your pleater video, so you can clean it all up and get, I hope, many enjoyable years of smocking from your used pleater. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, where we talk all things sewing and smocking, and I will have a lot more videos coming in the near future on pleating tips and smocking in general. So have a great weekend and happy smocking.